Well, here we go on the caste system. It's always hard to address the caste system because, frankly, if you look at any system that's based on both uh, social class and race, and whiter people being at the top and darker people being at the bottom, the flat out starting point is it's a racist system. It's You can justify that religiously, but doing so is one of the trickiest elements of Hinduism in terms of justification is the caste system. Now, what's interesting about this, of course, is that every major world religion at some point becomes hierarchical. And usually that also corresponds to patriarchy, which means that men begin to dominate the religion. They begin to emphasize divisions and hierarchy. And when they do that, they pervert the religion in some ways. So you can see this in the Catholic Church, for example. Some people believe, if you look at Jesus's message, it was very egalitarian, and the church then changed that later. You can see this in Judaism, where the religion becomes extremely male dominated, particularly as it begins to develop into a formal religion. And certainly in Hinduism, there is this correspondence of a social system and social class to race. And frankly, it's racist, it's indefensible on the face of it. And Hindus will argue, yes, but the laws of Manu, which were where the whole caste system originates, didn't say anything initially about inherited position. It didn't say anything about race either. It spoke of qualities or gunas. And so therefore, the original philosophy was perverted. Hard to argue with this because, on one hand, the system is the system, and it's been deeply rooted in Indian society for thousands of years, to the point where you can actually see genetic differences between Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. You can literally look at DNA and see there's a difference between them, which just shows you the extent to which there's been virtually no intermarriage between racial groups. And this has also preserved lighter skinned people at the top and darker skinned people at the bottom, because the Aryans, as you know, came from Europe, from the eastern part of Europe in the Caucasian area. So literally they were Caucasian people who came to India, lighter skinned, and the non-Aryans were the Dravidian people who were there originally, darker skinned. And this was a way that the Aryans basically set up a system where they dominated. And it's interesting to look at the hierarchy, because if you look at the Brahmins are the priest class, and the priest class is above the warrior class, which is interesting because the Aryans themselves were warriors. That was their background. So it's interesting that from a very early point, the Hindus put the priests at the top. This is also what happens in medieval Europe, where the priests, bishops, and the church gets put in an elevated position, and this causes problems as the warrior classes and the merchant classes begin to rise up, and it creates conflict, social conflict and religious conflict too. So if you look at Hinduism within the structure of the belief system, the Brahmins are the mouth, they're the mouthpiece, they're also the brain of the body. The Kshatriya, the warriors, are the arms, they're the ones that do the defending. The Vaishya, the business caste, are the thighs that sort of carry the weight of the body. And the Shudra are the feet, right? They're the ones who are doing a lot of the work and are dirty and have to do undesirable things. I'm not sure if feet do undesirable things, but you get the point. If you notice the population composition, that's not quite exactly right, but the Brahmins are between 4 and 6%. The Kshatriyas are between 6 and 10%. Vaishyas also between 6 and 10%, and the Shudras about 50%, which is interesting, which shows you that the Dalits, or the untouchables at the bottom, are also a large percentage of the population. So what's interesting about this is, if you look at the caste system not only breaks down the social positions, and you'll notice that it's also broken into colors. So the Brahmins are white, the Kshatriyas are red, the Vaishyas are brown, and the Shudras are black. And the Dalits and untouchables aren't even part of the system. It's interesting also to notice that the yogas are the spiritual approaches, that the lower castes are encouraged to use emotionally based yoga. The Kshatriyas are encouraged to use action-based yoga, so spiritual approaches based in action, because that's what they do in society. And the Jnana yoga is philosophical or mind-based yoga. So the Brahmins use their minds, the Kshatriyas use their bodies, and the lower classes use their emotions. It's really interesting. Now, it's interesting also that if you look at the percentage of Hindus in the caste system, it's about 50%. I know that doesn't add up to the percentages I gave you before, but if you add the Shudras in there, the Shudras are not technically part of the caste system. They're called they're called lower caste, but they're not part of the caste system, strictly speaking. Now, what's interesting about this, obviously, is it's the upper classes, the defining this religiously, and the twice-born ceremony is something that happens when you're a young man. Notice again, this is male-dominated, it's male-determined. Men are part of the caste system. Women are not considered part of it. They only transfer along, creating other members of the caste system. So it's extremely patriarchal. And Americans rightfully hate this system. It's regressive. It's nothing really to like about it. You can justify different sorts of people having different yogas, but I think what we have to do is examine the fact that we have our own caste system, and ours is based on social class. You look at people who are in the elite and upper classes, that includes many of you. Those privileges and benefits are passed down to the next generation. We don't talk much about it. We talk about what we would like to see. And what's interesting is, our ideology, American ideology, is idealism. Everybody has a chance. Everybody has a chance to make it, which isn't really true, but we like to think it's true. So if you look at lower middle class and poor people, generally they stay where they are. And I think it's interesting that caste has been described not as what should be, but just system of what is. It's sort of an objective, as they see it, objective definition of social reality. So you can make the case, as Isabel Wilkerson does in a book she just published, which is a fantastic book, by the way. I highly recommend it. Just finished reading it. And she basically argues that, we have an underlying caste grammar that's based in race, that we learn it as children through media. Sorry for the typo there. Just like as we're learning our mother tongue, and caste becomes a guide to how we speak and process information. And it's a form of oppression, and again, one that needs to be broken. But let's get back to the religious basis of castes. Now, gunas it's a Sanskrit word that's hard to translate. It roughly translates into qualities and or attributes. So if you think about this for a second, the three gunas are we all have aspects of each. The tamas is the sort of dullness, tiredness, fatigue. Sattva is higher consciousness, calmness, present-mindedness. And the rajas is extroversion, but also anxiety, emotions like anxiety and anger, frustration. Notice that boredom is in there. Boredom also touches into tamas. So obviously sattva is a good guna, and the passion and dullness and inertia are bad ones. But of course, Hindus don't look at things in terms of good and bad. We all have elements of these things. So if you look at the caste system from this perspective, it changes slightly. So the Brahmins are sattva predominant. They are present-minded. They are deeply interested in self-inquiry. They have been socialized to do that too. So these things are self-reinforcing. If you have these qualities and then you go into professions that encourage them, you're just going to reinforce that quality. The Kshatriyas are Raja predominant, which means they have, again, sort of active, energetic, powerful, extroverted, and passionate people. The Vaishyas are Rajas predominant also, and Tamas secondary, which means they're interested in worldly accomplishment. So that would justify the things that they do, which is to go out and make money, that they're merchants after all. And again, the Shudras are Tamas predominant. They're not as intellectual, and therefore they're physically driven. Now, this, of course, is infuriating if you are a Shudra, because it suggests that you're not very smart. This is where the problem comes in. And again, you're justifying hierarchy this way. But by the same token, I think it's interesting to think about, is there a sort of a natural tendency to divide people into the types of jobs and places that they have in society? Because from a Hindu perspective, we're all doing our dharma. All right, you're doing your dharma as a student. I'm doing my dharma as a teacher. Your parents are doing their dharma as breadwinners to help you. And so the dharma of the caste suggests that you should do what you're born to do. You don't challenge it in any way. So this is where there's a kind of a fatalism to this. And also the belief, of course, with reincarnation is that you were born into this caste because of previous incarnations. And that's, again, a little bit problematic, because it suggests that you're sort of responsible for your social position in some way. So the questions that I would ask you to think about here is, should the Varna system be considered part of Hinduism? Hindus disagree on this. Some Hindus will say, yeah, it's part of our social system. We can't deny it. Other Hindus will say, yeah, it's part of our social system, but it's a perversion of the original belief system, right? We had the gunas, and now we have caste, and caste is something different. I think this is a really interesting question about whether religion should make distinctions in spiritual approaches based on skills and personal inclinations. I would think that there's a pretty good case to be made for that if you think about it. Intellectual people should probably do things in an intellectual way, and people who are more emotionally driven should perhaps do that. So I think this is an interesting way of thinking about it. So the question really is, do you believe that people have qualities, and do you believe that those qualities shape society in some way? And if you do, then in some ways you're agreeing with the foundations of the caste system. So what I want you to do is I want you to write on one of these 4 questions. And you've been at this for about 15 minutes. Give it 15 minutes or so, and think about your view of the caste system. Very easy to write it off just simply as a racist system, and by all means, if that's the way you want to go, have at it. You might want to look at it a little bit more sympathetically, not to justify the racism or to justify the social oppression at the heart of it, but that's just, I just want your thoughts on this. So journal on it, write something, and turn it in on Classroom. Thanks.